The landscape of the way people buy and sell watches and how they're getting their information for watches is changing. So I want to go over that with you today and talk about some of the watch shows and auction scenes and what that means for you as a consumer. There are a couple different kinds of shows in the watch industry. There's your yearly trade shows that come out, SIHH, Baselworld. That's when the brands are introducing new products to the market. And then you have shows that happen usually in certain areas, certain regions. In the United States, we have the IWJG shows, which are dealer focused, where dealers and collectors a lot of times get together, and it's a lot like a swap meet, where people are trading and selling to each other. At the big shows, that's not happening. If you're an authorized dealer, you go to SIHH and you place your orders for the year. You see the new inventory that's coming out, and you sort of work on your allocation. The difference between SIHH and Baselworld are the exhibitors. And SIHH, which usually happens right at the beginning of the year, is heavy Richemont-focused brands. Okay, that's where they exhibit all their new product, and then they have other vendors who also exhibit there. Baselworld has over 500 exhibitors, and that happens usually in early spring, end of March, early April. Patek, Rolex, dozens and dozens of independent brands are there. Up until this year, Swatch Group had exhibited all of their product, but they have withdrawn. And so Baselworld is going through some dramatic sort of structural changes that affect how trade shows are going to perform going forward. The trade shows used to be where it felt like all of the year's product was coming out at one time. It's really changed a lot. I mean, we have pre-Basel releases now and pre-SIHH releases that leak out prior to the shows happening. And a lot of times as a dealer, you actually take on inventory before they're officially released at those shows. And then other times, other brands will debut those watches there, and it won't be until towards the end of that calendar year in which companies start receiving product. So it does depend on the brand, but you will also find that a lot of the brands will release a large segment of watches at the shows and then start to trick out other variations of those watches throughout the calendar year, maybe different dials or different metals, something like that. Other brands do not do that, like Patek Philippe, for example. They will release every single unit, every single watch, essentially at the same time at Baselworld. The only time that I can recall that they haven't done that was when they released the new Ladies 24 piece that just came out, which was not done at a show. But that could also be in response to sort of the climate of what's going on with the shows right now, where that has changed. And then when they do like special exhibitions like they did in 2017 here in the United States, where they released a handful of special models for the US market only. Other than that, each brand is a little bit different how they approach how their product's going to be released through the year. So both shows actually operate fairly similarly. It's usually very press heavy and dealer network heavy. It's very little with collectors. I mean, you have stores that'll bring some of the best customers along occasionally to those, but really those shows are dedicated to just the dealer network and press. So like IWJG shows happen much more frequently than the annual shows of SIHH and Baselworld. You have, I believe, monthly trade shows here in the States for IWJG, Vegas, New York, Miami, LA, and then they sort of rotate throughout the year. So that's a good opportunity for dealers to go and see what, if you're into the secondary market, which is really all that is secondary market watches, you can see what's available there, see sort of where the market is on product. That's a place where you find a lot of people who are not necessarily primary dealers heavily involved, okay? So those shows, again, are still pretty dealer focused. They're not really exhibits for customers. When I think of watch shows, I think of pop-ups and meet and greets. Those are the kind of watch shows that people get access to individuals, your watches, swatches, and whiskeys and cars. Like those kind of shows are really more predicated for consumers, and you can bring them in, you can bring the dealers and the consumer together. And then you have like enthusiast focused and sponsored events like the Red Bar events where all these collectors get together, put all the watches out, talk about watches. That's a really cool watch show event for people who really geek out about watches and want to network. I actually think that's probably the best type of watch show for people who just want to get into it and want to learn a little bit about it. But the major shows, the IWJG shows here in the States, really not for end consumers. And then your SIHH and your Baselworld are more of like the release of the product into the market. Again, not necessarily for those individuals who are consumers. Watches, I think, generally end up at auction because there really hadn't been a way to sell your watch to get the exposure to the watch in a consolidated marketplace. It always was sort of like the only way you could unload a watch was if you put it to auction. Certain watches make sense at auctions, right? Your extraordinarily rare Paul Newman Daytona, the one of one, his watch, his actual watch going to auction, that makes sense. Henry Graves' Patek pocket watch to go to auction, that makes sense. It's a very visible, it can be heavily marketed. Those are opportunities for exposure that you couldn't get if you sold it necessarily to a dealer or to a private. But that model, I think, is shifting because I know that auction houses are looking to buy watches from privates and to sell them not necessarily through the auction channel. Well, the one thing about auction houses, a lot of times, sometimes you can find a value buy there. I mean, you could find opportunities to buy watches maybe at auction that you couldn't from a dealer, which I think could be for a buyer, a great opportunity. For a seller, maybe not so much, right? So that's also something to take into consideration. I suppose if you were on the buying side, you can find good buys there. But if you're a seller and it's the condition, the market conditions and the environment for the auction isn't correct or isn't what maybe you'd hoped it would be, it could be maybe not something that you're really excited about selling your watch to. I mean, you see it with cars all the time. I mean, cars go to auction and you can have a model year configuration of a car go for X amount, and then you maybe have the same thing or something very similar and you're X minus 30, 40% because of the auction. It's just, they're hit or miss from my experience and from what I've seen. As a seller, I would be probably more cautious selling and using that avenue to sell my watches than I would maybe buying. I hope this information was helpful in sort of understanding how trade shows and auctions work if you're a consumer for watches. And if I can help you out, feel free to reach out to me on my Instagram account. Hope you liked my video. If you did, comment, like, subscribe for more Watchbox Studios original content.